A potential client calls in and she's asking whether I can assist her with a pending audit. When you hear a pending audit, it means that the IRS challenges or just checks their items on their taxpayer's tax return or their business's tax return. However, before jumping into the discussion what items are subject to the audit, I asked their client whether she knows what type of audit it is. She didn't know, but then we went into discussion what type of notices she received initially and where she's right now. And I asked these questions in order to determine what type of audit it was and also determine at what stage of audit she is. Why is it so important? It is important, first of all, for you to understand whether you can deal with the IRS on your own, how complicated that audit is. You will understand how broad the audit is, and you understand what way of communication with the IRS. Is there a specific person assigned? Can you extend any deadlines for the submission of the documents, and even how long the audit likely will continue? That would be the determination of a type of audit. You also need to know the stages of audit and how far are you and whether you have already rights to appeal or go and petition the U.S. tax court. I'm Olena RUTH, and I'm tax attorney and founder of RUTH Tax Law, and I will explain in this video what type of audits are and how to determine at what type of audit you have. In a separate video, I will discuss stages of the audit and what rights you have. There are three major types of audits, and I have another one, I call it a subcategory of the subtype of audit, because if you missed all the previous ones or any notifications, you jump into another one. So let's just go one by one. First type is correspondence audit. Correspondence audit is likely one of the simplest one, and I would say quite often relatively easy to get what you want or to obtain their adjustments that based on your documentation, even if you do not have a full set of the documentation. How do you determine whether you have a correspondence audit? Correspondence audit is performed by their service center, not by a local revenue agent or tax compliance officer. Thus, when you get the letter, you will have likely the service center address, not locally, unless you are located at their area of the service address. And you will not have the revenue agent's or tax compliance officer's name, because it's correspondence audit. It's performed by whoever is assigned when you reply. Now, why is it so? Because their notice with respect to correspondence audit is issued in most of the cases by computer. Because the computer has a matching system, the IRS accepts the information from the third persons about your income, several expenses or deductions, and then the matching system of the IRS compares the information to what IRS has to your tax return. And if there is some type of mismatch and some type of the conflict between the numbers, then the IRS sends out, or I would say IRS system sends out the notice to the taxpayer and saying, this is what items we would like to get information more about. And the correspondence audit are also simple because they are not as broad as other types. So it's usually targeting just a few items on the tax return. If you received a correspondence audit, that means that communication will be by mail. You received a letter, you've got a request, you combine the documents that you need, and you send out the letter to the IRS by specific deadline, and then the IRS reviews it, and then you either receive a letter requesting for additional information, which will be relatively narrow as a rule, or you will receive a letter stating that no change is going to be to your tax return. And again, you will not have a specific person to call in. You will have a 800 number to their department that you call for, either get an extension or ask any questions, which usually you do not get the answer. But I will prepare a separate video on this one. Now, because it's one of the most simple, so one of the simplest types, you can actually deal with this issue on your own. You do not have a tax professional in most of the cases. The next audit is an office audit. Office audit, you determine based on receiving a letter, and it will be with an address of a local address, and it will have a revenue agent or tax compliance officer, and you will have an appointment time to come to the IRS with your documentation, or your representative can come in, attorney, enrolled agent, or your CPA. That's why it's office audit, because it actually takes place in the office of the IRS. Now, what is the difference from a correspondence? This type of audit will have a broader number of issues, so it will be covered by, it will cover more items. Most of the time, what I see office audit is related to the self-employed persons or business tax returns. In this case, you still can figure out, I guess, some of the information, whether you want to represent yourself. But still, I believe that tax professional will be the best, because they usually all the communication in the during office audits should be short, to the point. As I say, lesser information you give to the IRS, the better. So everything should be on the point, and tax professional knows how to respond the requests. Now, with respect to the exchange of the information and communication, IRS now implements a lot the electronic download into the portal of the information, similar to correspondence audit, and you will communicate with a specific person who actually is on the initial notice. Third type of the audits, your field audit. The field audit is similar to office audit. However, here's the differences. First of all, the meeting will be performed at your location, either your home or your office. Their person assigned to your case will be a local revenue agent. Revenue agent, it would be a person who has more extensive training in the audits and examination than tax compliance officer, who's most of the time performs their office audit. This audit will have way broader issues, and quite often you notice that it starts with 1 year and can continue into another year, depending on how much of the substantiating documents you have. The field audit is one of those that you need a representation, because their attorney, CPA, or enrolled agent will work directly with the revenue agent, and revenue agent, because of her training, they know all the rules, and it will be really difficult for you on your own to explain, unless, I guess, you are in tax profession. Now, there is a fourth group, which I believe should be a separate type of the audits. Audit as a U.S. tax court. Now, it's not exactly an audit, because if you are already in a tax court, then you missed the previous initial communication from the IRS. So it's more as a stage. However, quite often happens that the IRS has a short period of time in order to assess their particular items, or they assess additional tax against the taxpayer. And because the IRS running out of the time, I quite often actually see that the IRS just issues notice of deficiency. Notice of deficiency is that very important notice that give you 90 days to petition the tax court. And if you do not petition the tax court within 90 days, then you lose your right to challenge the additions to your tax liability in the U.S. tax court, and you would have to go through a different procedure, which is discretionary, and it takes way longer time. So why I'm calling this as a one separate type of audit is because you actually communicate with the IRS counsel, you communicate, the case also can be delegated to the appeals. You will have you still have the process if you didn't provide any information at the first stages. And again, I understand it's just stages, but if you miss that opportunity before, the appeals officer who is delegated the case or IRS counsel pretty much perform the same audit that you would have with the tax compliance officer or revenue agent, except you are under wing of the tax court. And if you disagree, you can go to trial. So in part, it's a stage of the audit, and in part, it's a type of audit. Recommendation: correspondence audit you can deal on your own without intervention of without assistance of the tax professional. I highly recommend office and field audits to be performed with assistance of tax professional, and definitely tax court, you need help. In my case, my client, she actually pulled out a notice and we read through, and it was notice of deficiency. She had a deadline. So I knew that we would have to act really quickly with a lot of details. And as you see, would it be a correspondence audit? We would have more time. We would put everything together in a more comprehensive packet and within kind of longer period of time. So that's why it's important for you to know what type of audit it is. And if you call me with a pending audit, I hope you look at the notice and you will know what type of audit you have. If you have any questions, please call or write me. My contact information is below. And if you like this video, please give me a like, subscribe, and I will continue providing more videos on the different types of audits and stages of the audit and how you can deal with that on your own or when you need a professional help. And I will see you soon.